I was standing in the middle of what used to be my lake house when my phone rang, and the only thing left of the property was a pile of rubble and the concrete foundation jutting out like broken teeth from the Georgia red clay. The call was from my lawyer, Tom Mitchell, who sounded like he'd just witnessed a car accident in real time. "Keith, please tell me you're not at Cedar Lake right now," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. I looked around at the destruction, at the bulldozer tracks still fresh in the mud, at the splintered beams of what had been my grandfather's hand-built retreat since 1987, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "I'm here," I said quietly. "It's gone, Tom. The whole thing. They actually did it." The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds before Tom exploded. "Those absolute morons, Keith, tell me you have the documents I sent you last month. The property deeds. All of them." I patted my jacket pocket where I'd stuffed the manila envelope that morning, the one I'd been planning to review over coffee on the Lakehouse deck. The deck that no longer existed. "Got them right here." "Why?" "Because the Cedar Lake HOA just made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives," Tom said, and I could hear him typing furiously in the background. "I'm getting in my car right now. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. And Keith, this is going to get very interesting very fast." 20 minutes earlier, I'd been cruising down Highway 441 through the mountains of North Georgia, windows down, enjoying the September morning air. I'd driven up from Atlanta specifically to spend a long weekend at the Lakehouse, maybe do some fishing, definitely avoid the chaos of the city for a few days. I hadn't been to the property since June, which I'll admit was longer than usual, but work at the firm had been brutal and I'd needed to focus on closing a major commercial real estate deal. The Lakehouse wasn't going anywhere, or so I'd thought. When I turned onto Lakeview Drive, the private road that wound through the Cedar Lake Estates subdivision, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. There was fresh gravel on the road, new signs posted every 100 yards proclaiming Cedar Lake HOA regulations strictly enforced, and worst of all, a brand new guardhouse at what had always been an open entrance. A guy in a cheap security uniform stepped out holding up his hand. I rolled to a stop and he approached the driver's side. "Name and address, please," he said in a tone that suggested he'd been given a tiny bit of authority and planned to abuse every ounce of it. "Keith Jameson. I own the property at 47 Lakeview Drive," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I didn't recognize this guy, which was weird because Cedar Lake Estates only had about 30 homes total, and I knew most of the owners at least by sight. The security guard consulted his clipboard, frowning. "I don't have you on the approved list. You'll need to turn around and contact the HOA office to schedule access." I stared at him. "Schedule access to my own property? That's not how this works. I've owned that lake house for 15 years. Sir, all property owners need to be current on their HOA dues and in compliance with association regulations. According to my list, 47 Lakeview Drive is marked as non-compliant and access is restricted." He said this like he was reciting from a manual, which he probably was. I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't pay HOA dues. My property isn't part of the HOA, never has been." His expression shifted to something smug. "All properties in Cedar Lake Estates are subject to HOA jurisdiction as of the new bylaws implemented in March. Now, I need you to turn your vehicle around or I'll have to call the authorities." This was insane. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign for the Cedar Lake HOA office. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice syrupy sweet. "Cedar Lake Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. How may I provide you with excellent service today?" "This is Keith Jameson. I own 47 Lakeview Drive and there's a security guard blocking me from accessing my property." "What's going on?" The sweetness evaporated instantly. "Mr. Jameson." "Yes. Your property has been flagged for multiple violations and outstanding dues totaling $8,400. Until that balance is paid in full, access to the property is denied per Section 12 of the revised HOA covenant." "I don't have a covenant with the HOA," I said slowly, like I was explaining something to a child. "My property predates the HOA by decades. I'm not a member and I don't owe you a single cent." "That's not what our records show," Brenda said, and her tone had gone from sweet to ice cold in record time. "In fact, Mr. Jameson, I should inform you that due to the extensive violations and unpaid assessments, the HOA board voted last week to exercise our lien rights. The property at 47 Lakeview Drive has been scheduled for remediation." "Remediation," I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means the structure will be removed and the land will be cleared to HOA standards. The cost will be added to your outstanding balance. Have a blessed day, Mr. Jameson." She hung up. I sat there in my truck for a solid 10 seconds, trying to process what I'd just heard. Then I threw the truck in reverse, backed up 50 yards, and gunned it straight past the guardhouse. The security guard dove out of the way and started shouting, but I was already accelerating down Lakeview Drive, my heart pounding. I saw the bulldozer first. It was a massive Caterpillar D8, bright yellow, sitting in what used to be my front yard. Then I saw the pile of rubble, and my brain finally accepted what my eyes were seeing. They'd demolished my lake house. Completely. The entire structure was just gone, reduced to broken wood and shattered glass and crushed memories. A woman was standing near the bulldozer, talking to the operator. She was maybe 50, blonde hair and a sharp bob, wearing white capri pants and a pink polo shirt with Cedar Lake HOA president embroidered on the chest. When she saw me pull up, she put her hands on her hips and marched over like she owned the place. "Mr. Jameson, I presume," she said. "I'm Patricia Thornton, HOA president. You're trespassing on HOA property. I've already called the sheriff. I got out of my truck slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. You destroyed my house." "We removed a non-compliant structure from HOA land," Patricia corrected. "You were notified multiple times about the violations and the outstanding dues. You ignored every notice, every fine, every attempt at resolution. This is the consequence of your actions." "This was my grandfather's house," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "He built it himself in 1987. My property isn't part of your HOA. You had no right." Patricia pulled a folder from under her arm and opened it with a flourish. "According to the county records updated in March of this year, all properties within the Cedar Lake Estate's geographical boundaries fall under HOA jurisdiction. You received notice of the bylaw changes. You received 14 separate violation notices. You received 3 certified letters regarding your outstanding dues. You ignored all of them." "I never received anything," I said. "And even if I had, you can't just force my property into an HOA. That's not legal." "The county attorney reviewed our revised bylaws personally," Patricia said, and she actually smiled. "Everything we've done is completely legal and proper. Now the current balance on your account is $8,400 in back dues and fines, plus the cost of remediation, which is approximately $42,000. We accept cashier's checks or wire transfers." I looked past her at the rubble pile that used to be my childhood summers, my refuge, my connection to my grandfather who'd passed away 3 years ago. The rage that had been building suddenly crystallized into something cold and focused. "You made a mistake," I said quietly. "A really big one." Patricia's smile widened. "Is that a threat, Mr. Jameson? Because I should tell you that the HOA has a very competent legal team and we're prepared to pursue collections aggressively. You'll be hearing from our attorneys." That's when I heard the sirens. 2 sheriff's department cruisers came up the drive, lights flashing. Patricia waved at them like she was greeting old friends. The deputy who got out of the first car was younger, maybe 30, with a nameplate that read Collins. He looked at the rubble, then at me, then at Patricia. "Madam, you reported a trespasser?" "This is Keith Jameson," Patricia said. "He's on HOA property without authorization and he's been verbally aggressive. I want him removed immediately." Deputy Collins turned to me. "Sir, I need you to calm down and step away from the vehicle." "I am calm," I said, which was technically true. I was beyond anger now, into a weird zone of absolute clarity. "And this is my property. My name is on the deed, Keith Jameson. I've owned this land for 15 years and my grandfather owned it for 30 years before that." The deputy frowned. "Madam, is this his property or not?" Patricia waved the folder again. "The property falls under HOA jurisdiction. He's in violation of multiple covenants and has outstanding debts. We have legal authority to be here." "That doesn't answer my question," Deputy Collins said, and I started to like him a little bit. "Who owns the land according to the county deed?" "I do," I said. "Keith Jameson, you can verify it with the county clerk's office right now." Collins looked at Patricia, who had gone a bit pink in the face. "Madam, if he owns the property, we can't remove him for trespassing. That's not how it works." "The HOA has a lien," Patricia said quickly. "We have legal authority to enforce our covenants." "That's a civil matter," Collins said. "You need to work that out with lawyers. We're not getting involved in an HOA dispute." He turned to me. "Sir, I recommend you contact an attorney. This isn't something we can help with." "Already done," I said, which was true as of about 10 minutes ago. The deputy nodded and started walking back to his cruiser, but Patricia wasn't done. "Officer," he rammed through our security gate. "That's destruction of property. I want to file charges." I pulled out my phone and showed Collins the video I'd taken as I drove past the guardhouse. I went around the gate, didn't touch it. That guard jumped out of the way for dramatic effect. Collins watched the video, sighed, and looked at Patricia with barely concealed annoyance. "Madam, please don't waste our time with false reports. You folks work this out yourselves." He got back in his cruiser and both cars headed back down the drive. Patricia's face had gone from pink to red. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Jameson. By the time our lawyers are done with you, you'll wish you'd just paid the dues." "I'm going to wait right here for my attorney," I said. "On my property. Don't let me keep you." She stalked back to her Mercedes SUV, and the bulldozer operator climbed down and followed her. They were gone within 5 minutes. Leaving me alone with the ruins, Tom Mitchell arrived 40 minutes later, driving way too fast in his Audi sedan. He got out with a briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, his tie loosened, and his expression somewhere between furious and gleeful. "Show me the property markers," he said without preamble. We walked the perimeter of what had been my Lakehouse property. The iron survey stakes were still there, driven into the ground back in 1987 when my grandfather had the land surveyed. Tom took photos of everything, measurements, GPS coordinates. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. I gave him the whole story, from the guardhouse to Patricia Thornton's smug face. Tom listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression getting darker. "Keith, I need you to understand something," he said when I finished. "What they did here isn't just illegal. It's potentially criminal. You don't demolish someone's property without a court order, and even with an HOA lien, there's a process. They skipped every single step of that process." "So what do we do?" I asked. Tom set his briefcase on the hood of his car and opened it. "First, we're going to review these documents you inherited. Then we're going to file so many lawsuits they'll need a forklift to carry the paperwork. And then, if I'm right about what I think is in this envelope, we're going to teach the Cedar Lake HOA a very expensive lesson about property rights." The manila envelope contained copies of every deed, title, and property document related to Cedar Lake Estates going back to 1962. My grandfather had been meticulous about record keeping, and when he died, everything went into a safe deposit box that I'd finally gotten around to emptying last month. I'd glanced through the papers but hadn't really studied them. Now Tom spread them across the hood of his Audi like he was assembling a puzzle. "Holy hell," he whispered after about 5 minutes. "Keith, do you know what you have here?" "Old property records," I said. "You have the original master deed for the entire Cedar Lake Estates subdivision," Tom said, holding up a yellowed document, dated May 1962. "And according to this, the person who purchased the entire 247 acres from the county was Harold Jameson. Harold Jameson was my grandfather." "Okay," I said slowly. "So he bought the land before it was developed, I knew that. He sold off lots to developers in the 70s, kept 40 acres for himself, including the lakefront property." "Right," Tom said, "but look at this." He pulled out another document, this one from 1979. "This is the subdivision plat. Your grandfather filed it personally. He created Cedar Lake Estates as a subdivision, divided it into lots, and sold them off one by one. But Keith, look at the covenant language." I read where he was pointing. The original covenant specifically stated that Lot 1, comprising approximately 40 acres including the primary lakefront access, would remain under the control of Harold Jameson and his heirs in perpetuity. All other lots would be subject to reasonable restrictions to maintain property values, but Lot 1 was explicitly exempt from any homeowner association or covenant requirements. "So I was right," I said. "My property isn't part of the HOA. It's better than that," Tom said, and he was actually grinning now. "Look at this document from 1995. It was an amendment to the subdivision covenant signed by 30 homeowners and my grandfather. It established the Cedar Lake Estates Homeowners Association and gave them authority over common areas, architectural review, and maintenance standards. But there was a clause in paragraph 7 that made my breath catch. All HOA actions and bylaws require approval of the Lot 1 owner prior to implementation," I read aloud. "The Lot 1 owner retains final authority over any subdivision modifications, assessments, or covenant amendments." Tom nodded. "Your grandfather was smart. He created the HOA to maintain property values and keep the subdivision nice, but he made sure he kept control. He could veto anything they tried to do that he didn't like." "And I inherited Lot 1 when he died," I said. "You didn't just inherit the Lakehouse," Tom said. "You inherited controlling authority over the entire subdivision. Every bylaw change, every assessment, every fine they've levied in the last 3 years, completely invalid without your approval. And I'm guessing you never approved anything because they never asked." I thought about Patricia Thornton's smug face, her folder full of violation notices, her casual dismissal of my property rights. "They don't know, do they, about the Lot 1 clause?" "Oh, it gets better," Tom said. He pulled out a county property tax record from earlier this year. In March, the HOA filed new bylaws with the county. The county clerk accepted them because they looked official and nobody bothered to check them against the original covenant. But these new bylaws, they directly contradict the 1995 amendment. They claim universal authority over all properties and they completely eliminate the Lot 1 exception. "Can they do that?" I asked. "Absolutely not," Tom said. "You can't unilaterally amend a covenant that requires unanimous consent, and you definitely can't strip away someone's deed rights just by filing paperwork with the county." But that's what they tried to do, and the county clerk didn't catch it because it's not the clerk's job to verify the legal validity of HOA documents. I looked back at the rubble pile. So when Patricia said the county attorney reviewed their bylaws, she either lied or the county attorney gave them terrible advice, Tom finished. "Either way, they demolished your property based on fraudulent authority." "Keith, this is big. This is really big." My phone rang. "Unknown number with a local area code," I answered. Mr. Jameson, this is Sharon Keene from Keene & Associates. We represent the Cedar Lake Estates Homeowners Association. We're calling to inform you that our client intends to pursue collections on the outstanding balance of $50,600 related to your property at 47 Lakeview Drive. We're prepared to file a lawsuit if payment isn't received within 10 business days. I put the phone on speaker so Tom could hear. Mrs. Keene, I'm here with my attorney, Tom Mitchell. You might want to put your client on notice that they just demolished my house illegally, and I'll be filing both civil and criminal complaints within the hour. There was a pause. Mr. Jameson, our client followed all proper procedures. The property was in violation and subject to a valid lien. The remediation was legally authorized. Tom leaned toward the phone. Tom Mitchell here. Your client filed fraudulent bylaws that contradict the subdivision's original covenant and violated my client's deed rights. Tell me, did anyone at your firm actually review the 1995 covenant amendment before authorizing this demolition? Another pause, longer this time. I'll need to consult with my client and review our files. We'll be in touch. She hung up. She has no idea what she's dealing with, Tom said. I guarantee they hired a cheap HOA lawyer who rubber-stamped whatever Patricia Thornton told them to do. What's our next step? I asked. Tom was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling the county sheriff and the district attorney. What they did here is destruction of property, possibly fraud, definitely criminal trespass. Then we file for an emergency injunction to freeze all HOA activities pending a full audit. Then we file a civil suit for damages, emotional distress, and violation of your deed rights. And then, once we have all their attention, we inform them that you own controlling interest in their entire subdivision and every decision they've made in the last 3 years is void. That's going to make me real popular around here, I said. Keith, they demolished your grandfather's house, Tom said quietly. They destroyed family history, personal property, and a structure with both monetary and sentimental value. Then they tried to charge you for the privilege. You don't owe these people anything except a very harsh lesson in property law. He was right. I looked at the rubble pile again and felt the anger come back, clean and sharp. Do it, all of it. The next week was a blur of legal activity. Tom filed a criminal complaint with the county sheriff, naming Patricia Thornton and the HOA board members for destruction of property and fraud. He filed an emergency injunction in Superior Court to halt all HOA enforcement activities. He filed a civil suit seeking $2 million in damages, and he sent a certified letter to every homeowner in Cedar Lake Estates informing them that all HOA actions taken since 2022 were legally void and that I, as the Lot 1 owner, would be exercising my authority under the 1995 covenant. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Patricia Thornton called me directly, which was her first mistake. Tom had told me to record everything, so I had my phone set to auto-record all calls. Mr. Jameson, this is Patricia Thornton. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to sit down and discuss a resolution to this misunderstanding. Ms. Thornton, you demolished my house. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a crime. Her voice got tight. The HOA was acting in good faith based on legal advice. We're willing to waive the outstanding balance and offer a settlement to rebuild the structure. I don't negotiate with criminals, I said. You'll be hearing from my attorney and possibly from law enforcement. Don't contact me again. I hung up. Tom gave me a thumbs up from across his office conference table. The county district attorney's office called 2 days later. Assistant DA named Marcus Webb, sounding exhausted before the conversation even started. Mr. Jameson, I've reviewed the complaint your attorney filed. I have some questions about the timeline of events. I walked him through everything again. Webb listened, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or specific conversations. And you have documentation proving your ownership and the covenant restrictions, he asked. Copies are already in the file my attorney sent you, I said. Original documents are in a safe deposit box and available for examination. Okay, here's where we are. The Sheriff's Department is opening an investigation into the HOA Board's actions. Specifically, we're looking at criminal trespass, destruction of property, and possibly fraud if we can prove they knowingly filed false documents with the county. I want to be straight with you, though. Prosecuting HOA members is tricky. They're going to claim they relied on legal advice and acted in good faith. They demolished my house based on fraudulent authority, I said. How is that good faith? I'm not disagreeing with you, Webb said. I'm telling you what their defense will be. But here's what I can do. I can apply pressure, make it clear that this is a serious criminal investigation, and use that to force a settlement that makes you whole. If they refuse to cooperate, then we move forward with charges. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Give me 2 weeks to interview witnesses and review documents, Webb said. I'll be in touch. The emergency injunction hearing happened on a Wednesday morning in late September. Tom and I showed up with 2 boxes of documents. The HOA's lawyer, Sharon Keene, showed up with Patricia Thornton and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Judge Raymond Foster presided. He was maybe 60, with gray hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense in his courtroom. Tom presented our case methodically. He showed the original 1962 master deed with my grandfather's name. He showed the 1979 subdivision plat with the Lot 1 exemption. He showed the 1995 covenant amendment requiring Lot 1 owner approval for all HOA actions. Then he showed the March 2024 bylaw changes that eliminated those protections, filed without my knowledge or consent. Your Honor, this is a clear case of fraudulent modification of a binding covenant, Tom said. The HOA claimed universal authority they didn't have, filed false documents with the county, and then used that fraudulent authority to destroy my client's property. We're seeking an immediate injunction halting all HOA enforcement activities pending a full legal review. Sharon Keene stood up, looking less confident than she'd sounded on the phone. Your Honor, the HOA acted in good faith based on the bylaws as filed with the county. We had no reason to believe those bylaws were invalid. The property in question was in clear violation of subdivision standards, and the owner failed to respond to numerous notices. Judge Foster held up a hand. Mrs. Keene, did you or anyone from your firm review the original subdivision covenant before authorizing this demolition? We reviewed the current bylaws on file with the county, Keene said. That's not what I asked. Did you review the original covenant from 1995? Keene hesitated. Not specifically, Your Honor. Our client provided us with the operative governing documents, so you relied on the HOA's representations without independent verification, Judge Foster said. It wasn't a question. He flipped through the documents Tom had provided, taking his time. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers. Finally, Foster looked up. I've seen a lot of HOA disputes, but this is something else entirely. Ms. Keene, your client doesn't just have a weak case. They have no case. They demolished a man's property based on authority they didn't have, using bylaws that directly contradict the recorded covenant. That's not a good faith mistake. That's negligence at best and fraud at worst. Patricia Thornton stood up from the gallery. Your Honor, if I may, you may not, Foster said sharply. Sit down, madam. You're not a party to these proceedings. He turned back to Keene. I'm granting the injunction. All Cedar Lake Estates HOA enforcement activities are suspended immediately pending a full resolution of this matter. The HOA is prohibited from levying fines, restricting access, or taking any action against any property owner. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to immediately remove any security barriers or access restrictions to Mr. Jameson's property. Do you understand? Keene nodded, looking pale. Yes, Your Honor. Good. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a status hearing. I want to see a detailed proposal for how the HOA intends to make Mr. Jameson whole and Miss Keene. I strongly suggest you advise your client to cooperate with the district attorney's investigation. This court does not look kindly on destruction of property. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. Tom and I walked out of the courthouse into the September sunshine. He was practically bouncing on his heels. That went even better than I hoped, he said. Foster is one of the good ones. He actually reads the documents and applies the law. So what happens now, I asked. Now they panic, Tom said. They've got an injunction shutting down their entire operation, a criminal investigation hanging over their heads, and a civil suit that they're going to lose spectacularly. Patricia Thornton is going to be getting calls from every homeowner in the subdivision asking what the hell is going on. The pressure is about to get intense. He was right. By that evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. Most of the calls were from Cedar Lake homeowners I'd never met, asking about the injunction and what it meant for the subdivision. Some were angry, blaming me for disrupting the HOA. Others were sympathetic, shocked that the board had demolished someone's house. One call stood out. The guy identified himself as Robert Chen, owner of 23 Lakeview Drive. Mr. Jameson, I don't know if you remember me, but I met your grandfather a few times back in the 90s. He was a good man. I'm sorry about what happened to your house. Thanks, I said. Did you need something? I wanted to give you a heads up, Chen said. Patricia Thornton has been calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. She's telling people that you're trying to take over the subdivision and that we need to fight back. I thought you should know. Fight back how? I asked. She didn't say specifically, but she's talking about hiring a bigger law firm and assessing all the homeowners to pay for it. A lot of people are upset. The subdivision has been running smoothly for years, and now suddenly everything's shut down and we're looking at legal bills. The subdivision was running on fraudulent bylaws, I said. Everything the HOA did in the last 3 years was illegal. That's not my fault. I know, Chen said, but try telling that to people who are scared and angry. Just watch your back, okay? Patricia has a way of getting people riled up. The emergency HOA meeting was held at the Cedar Lake Clubhouse, a nice timber frame building near the boat launch. I wasn't officially invited, but as the Lot 1 owner, I had a right to attend any HOA meeting. Tom advised me to go, if only to hear what they were planning. I showed up at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. The parking lot was packed. When I walked into the meeting room, the conversation died instantly. About 40 people were there, sitting in folding chairs, and every single one of them turned to stare at me. Patricia Thornton was at the front of the room, standing behind a podium. She'd dressed for the occasion in a navy blue suit like she was testifying before Congress. "Mr. Jameson," she said coldly, "this is a private meeting for HOA members." "I'm the Lot 1 owner," I said. "Under the 1995 covenant, I have the right to attend and veto any HOA decisions, so I'm staying." "That covenant is under legal dispute," Patricia said. "No, it's not," I said. "Judge Foster's ruling was pretty clear. Your fraudulent bylaws are void. The original covenant stands. If you want to hold an official HOA meeting, I need to be here." I took a seat in the back row. Patricia's face went red, but she couldn't really argue with a court order. She turned back to the assembled homeowners. "As I was saying before we were interrupted, the HOA is facing an unprecedented attack on our authority. Mr. Jameson is attempting to claim control over the entire subdivision based on an outdated and irrelevant provision in an old covenant. His lawyer has convinced a judge to shut down our operations, leaving all of us vulnerable." Someone raised their hand. "Patricia, is it true you demolished his house?" "We removed a non-compliant structure after repeated violations and unpaid dues," Patricia said. "It was a legally authorized action." "But the judge said you didn't have authority," another voice called out. Patricia's smile looked strained. "The judge made a preliminary ruling based on incomplete information. When all the facts come out, we're confident our actions will be vindicated." I stood up. "That's not what Judge Foster said. He said your bylaws are fraudulent and you destroyed my property illegally. He also suggested you cooperate with the criminal investigation." The room erupted in conversation. People were turning to each other, asking questions, looking confused and worried. Patricia banged a gavel on the podium. "That's enough. Mr. Jameson is not a member of this HOA and he doesn't get to speak at our meetings. Actually, under the 1995 covenant, the Lot 1 owner has final authority over all HOA decisions," I said. "I'm not just a member, I'm effectively the final vote on anything you want to do." "That's ridiculous," Patricia said. I pulled out my phone and brought up the scanned copy of the covenant. "Paragraph 7, Section 3. I can read it out loud if you want." Robert Chen stood up from the middle section. "Patricia, if what he's saying is true, why didn't you tell us about this before? Why are we just finding out now that the HOA has been operating without proper authority?" "Because it's not true," Patricia snapped. "This is a legal technicality that Mr. Jameson's lawyer is exploiting. We've been operating in good faith for years." "You demolished his house," someone else said. "How is that good faith?" The meeting devolved into chaos. People were shouting questions at Patricia, arguing with each other, demanding answers. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was pointless. After about 20 minutes, she gave up and adjourned the meeting. I left the clubhouse and found Robert Chen waiting by my truck. "That was something," he said. "I've never seen Patricia lose control of a room like that. She destroyed my property and lied to the homeowners about having authority to do it," I said. "What did she expect?" Chen nodded. "For what it's worth, I believe you. And I think a lot of other people do too. Patricia's been getting more aggressive with the HOA rules over the last year. Fines for minor violations, restrictions on what colors you can paint your house, rules about landscaping. A lot of folks are fed up." "So why is she still president?" I asked. "Because she's loud and most people don't want to deal with the drama of opposing her," Chen said. "But this might be the push people need. If you're serious about exercising your authority over the HOA, you might have more support than you think." I thought about that as I drove back to Atlanta that night. I'd come to Cedar Lake for a quiet weekend at my grandfather's Lakehouse. Now I was in the middle of a legal war, facing off against an HOA president who'd committed multiple crimes and was desperately trying to cover them up. The smart move would be to take whatever settlement money the HOA offered and walk away. But that rubble pile kept haunting me. My grandfather had built that house with his own hands. I'd spent summers there as a kid, learning to fish and swim, listening to his stories about buying the land when it was nothing but forest and red clay. He'd created Cedar Lake Estates to be a place where people could enjoy the mountains and the lake without the chaos of resort tourism. He'd set up the HOA to protect that vision, not to give petty tyrants like Patricia Thornton power to destroy people's homes. I called Tom Mitchell the next morning. "I want to take control of the HOA, I said. Not to run it myself, but to clean it up. Get rid of Patricia and anyone else who thinks this kind of behavior is acceptable. That's going to take time and effort," Tom warned. "You'll need to call for new elections, get involved in the governance, probably deal with a lot of angry people." "My grandfather created this place," I said. "I'm not going to let someone trash his legacy because they're on a power trip. What do I need to do?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Okay, First, we need to make absolutely sure your authority under the covenant is ironclad. I'll file a declaratory judgment action asking the court to officially confirm your rights as Lot 1 owner. Second, we need to force the current HOA board to open their books. I want to see where the money's been going, who authorized what, all of it. Third, we call for new elections under the proper covenant procedures. How long will that take? I asked. Could be a few months, could be longer if Patricia fights us on every step. But Keith, once we start this, you need to be prepared to follow through. These things get messy. They demolished my house, I said. It's already messy. The declaratory judgment hearing was scheduled for late October. In the meantime, the district attorney's investigation moved forward. Marcus Webb's office subpoenaed all the HOA's records, including emails, financial statements, and meeting minutes. They interviewed Patricia Thornton, the other board members, the bulldozer operator, and the security guard who'd tried to block my access. Tom got copies of everything through discovery in the civil case. We spent hours going through the documents in his office, and what we found was worse than I'd expected. The HOA had been hemorrhaging money for the last 2 years. Patricia had hired her brother-in-law's landscaping company to maintain common areas at inflated rates. She'd approved a $40,000 contract to repave the subdivision roads that should have cost maybe $20,000. She'd spent HOA funds on the new guardhouse and security system without proper member approval. And when the money started running out, she'd gotten creative. Look at this, Tom said, pointing to an email from Patricia to the HOA's previous lawyer. She's asking about expanding the HOA's authority to include properties that were originally exempt. The lawyer tells her explicitly that she can't do that without consent from the affected property owners. And here's her response. We'll find another lawyer who's less cautious. So she knew she didn't have authority, I said. Oh, it's better than that, Tom said. He pulled up another document, a memo from Sharon Keene's firm. Keene sent this to Patricia 3 weeks before they demolished your house. It says the firm reviewed the county records and found inconsistencies with the original covenant. They recommended getting a formal legal opinion before taking any enforcement action against your property. And Patricia ignored them, I said. Not just ignored. Look at the email chain. Tom scrolled down. Patricia had responded to Keene telling her that the HOA board had voted to move forward with remediation immediately, and that they'd accept full responsibility for any legal consequences. She'd essentially ordered the lawyer to proceed with demolishing my house, even though she knew it was legally questionable. That's going to destroy any good faith defense, Tom said. She can't claim she relied on legal advice when she ignored that advice and ordered them to do it anyway. The evidence kept piling up. Financial records showed that Patricia had been paying herself a management fee of $1,500 a month, which was nowhere in the approved HOA budget. She'd used HOA funds to take the board members on a planning retreat to a golf resort in Florida. She'd even charged personal expenses to the HOA credit card and then doctored the records to make them look like legitimate business expenses. This isn't just about your house anymore, Tom said. Patricia Thornton has been embezzling from the HOA for years. The homeowners are going to go ballistic when they see this. I thought about Robert Chen and the 40 people at that emergency meeting. They deserve to know what's been happening with their money. Tom grinned. Want to help me prepare a bombshell report? We compiled everything into a detailed summary. The fraudulent bylaw changes, the ignored legal advice, the financial mismanagement, the embezzlement, and the illegal demolition. Tom sent copies to the district attorney, filed them with the court as evidence in our civil case, and then sent a copy to every homeowner in Cedar Lake Estates with a cover letter explaining what the documents showed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing within hours. Homeowners who'd been paying increasing HOA dues for years suddenly understood where their money had been going. People who'd been fined for minor violations realized the whole enforcement system was corrupt. And several former board members who'd resigned in protest over Patricia's behavior came forward with their own stories of her bullying and financial irregularities. Patricia tried to do damage control, sending out her own letter claiming the documents were taken out of context and that I was trying to destroy the HOA to avoid paying my legitimate debts. But it was too late. The homeowners had seen the evidence. They'd read Patricia's emails admitting she knew the bylaws were questionable. They'd seen the credit card statements showing personal expenses charged to the HOA. An online petition started circulating demanding Patricia's immediate resignation. Within 48 hours, it had signatures from more than 70% of the homeowners. Patricia refused to resign. Instead, she sent out another letter threatening to sue anyone who continued to spread defamatory lies about her conduct. The letter was so aggressive and so tone-deaf that it actually made things worse. The district attorney's office moved faster than I expected. On a Friday afternoon in early November, Marcus Webb called me personally. Mr. Jameson, I wanted to give you a heads up before this goes public. We're filing criminal charges against Patricia Thornton and 2 other HOA board members today. Charges include theft by conversion, criminal trespass, and making false statements on government documents. I sat down at my desk, feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. What's the timeline? Arraignment will be early next week. We're asking for significant bail given the financial crimes involved. If convicted on all counts, Ms. Thornton is looking at several years in prison and substantial fines. And the other board members? I asked. Frank Dunn and Lisa Martinez. They were aware of the financial irregularities and participated in the decision to demolish your property. The third board member, Gary Holloway, is cooperating with our investigation. He resigned from the board 6 months ago specifically because he thought Patricia was breaking the law. After Webb hung up, I sat in my office for a long time staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline. I'd wanted justice for what happened to my grandfather's house. I'd wanted Patricia Thornton to face consequences for her actions. Now she was being arrested, and the whole ugly mess was about to become very public. Tom called me 20 minutes later. Have you seen the news? I pulled up the local news website. The headline read, HOA president arrested for embezzlement, illegal demolition of property. Below it was Patricia Thornton's mugshot, her expression a mix of outrage and shock. The story detailed the charges and included quotes from the district attorney about the importance of holding HOA leaders accountable for criminal behavior. It mentioned my case specifically, describing how Patricia had demolished my Lakehouse despite knowing she lacked legal authority. The comment section was already filling up with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. This is going to be national news by tomorrow, Tom said. HOA corruption stories always get traction, and this one has everything. Criminal charges, embezzlement, property destruction. You're going to get media requests. I don't want to talk to the media, I said. I just want my house rebuilt and the HOA fixed, then we focus on that, Tom said. The criminal case is the DA's problem now. We need to win the declaratory judgment and get you confirmed as having authority over the subdivision. Then we can clean house. The declaratory judgment hearing happened 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed with Cedar Lake homeowners, reporters, and curious observers. Judge Foster presided again, looking distinctly unamused by all the attention. Sharon Keene was no longer representing the HOA. They'd hired a bigger firm from Atlanta, and their new lawyer was a guy named David Brenner who specialized in complex property disputes. Brenner was good, I had to admit. He made a strong argument that the 1995 Covenant Amendment was ambiguous and that modern HOA governance principles should supersede outdated provisions giving one owner veto power. Tom countered with the plain language of the covenant, the documented history of my grandfather's intent when creating the subdivision, and the fact that 30 homeowners had explicitly agreed to the Lot 1 clause when they signed the 1995 amendment. Your Honor, this isn't complicated, Tom said. My client's grandfather created this subdivision. He set up the HOA to maintain property values, but he retained final authority to prevent exactly what happened here, an HOA board running amok and abusing their power. The covenant is clear, the homeowners agreed to it, and the HOA violated it repeatedly. Judge Foster took a week to issue his ruling. When the decision came down, it was comprehensive and unambiguous. The court confirmed my authority as Lot 1 owner. It declared all HOA actions taken since March 2024 void for lack of proper approval. It ordered the HOA to pay restitution for the demolition of my Lakehouse, with the amount to be determined at a separate hearing. And it gave me explicit authority to call for new elections and restructure the HOA board. Patricia Thornton, out on bail and facing criminal charges, issued a statement through her new criminal defense attorney calling the ruling a miscarriage of justice. Nobody cared. The same day the ruling came down, I sent out a letter to all Cedar Lake homeowners calling for an emergency meeting to discuss the future of the HOA. The meeting was held on a cold Saturday in late November at the clubhouse. Almost every homeowner showed up. I stood at the podium where Patricia had stood a month earlier, looking out at faces that ranged from curious to hopeful to skeptical. I'm not here to be your HOA president, I said. I didn't ask for this situation. But my grandfather created Cedar Lake Estates to be a place where people could enjoy the mountains and the lake. He set up the HOA to protect that vision. Somewhere along the way, the HOA lost sight of that and became about power and control instead of community. I paused, making sure I had their attention. The court has confirmed that I have final authority over HOA decisions. I'm going to use that authority to make some changes. First, we're going to elect a new board. Anyone who wants to run can nominate themselves. We'll have the election in 30 days. Second, we're going to establish clear financial controls and transparency. Every homeowner will have access to the HOA budget and expenses. Third, we're going to simplify the rules. No more fines for having the wrong color mailbox or planting the wrong kind of flowers. The HOA exists to maintain common areas and protect property values, not to micromanage people's lives. Robert Chen raised his hand. What about the money Patricia stole? Can we get that back? The district attorney is pursuing criminal charges and restitution, I said. Beyond that, we can file a civil suit against Patricia personally. But I'm not going to lie to you, recovering embezzled money is hard. We might get some of it back, we might not. What I can promise is that it won't happen again. Someone else asked about my lake house. Are you going to rebuild? Yes, I said. The HOA is paying restitution as ordered by the court, and I'm rebuilding. It won't be exactly the same as what my grandfather built, but it'll be close. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours. We talked about what kind of HOA the homeowners actually wanted, what rules made sense, what the budget should look like. People who'd been silent for years spoke up with ideas and concerns. It felt, for the first time since this whole mess started, like a real community. At the end of the meeting, we set the election date and established a nominating committee. Robert Chen agreed to run for president. A retired accountant named Margaret Walsh volunteered to be treasurer. A landscape architect named James Porter offered to handle architectural review, with the explicit goal of making the process less restrictive and more reasonable. I walked out of that meeting feeling like maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of this disaster. The trial for Patricia Thornton and the other board members happened in February. I attended as the primary victim and witness. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. The fraudulent bylaws, the ignored legal advice, the financial embezzlement, the illegal demolition. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd made mistakes but hadn't intended to commit crimes. The jury didn't buy it. After 2 days of deliberation, they found Patricia guilty on all counts. Frank Dunn and Lisa Martinez were convicted of lesser charges for their participation. At sentencing, Judge Foster gave Patricia 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution for the embezzled funds and the cost of demolishing my lake house. It was a harsh sentence, but Foster made it clear he was sending a message about HOA accountability. Ms. Thornton, you were entrusted with managing a community on behalf of your neighbors, Foster said. Instead, you stole their money, abused your authority, and destroyed someone's property to cover up your own failures. The court has no sympathy for that kind of behavior. I watched Patricia being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I felt a strange emptiness. Justice had been served, but my grandfather's house was still gone. The rebuilding process took 8 months. I worked with an architect to recreate the lake house as closely as possible to the original design, using photos and my own memories. The HOA's restitution payment covered most of the cost, and I added my own money to make sure it was done right. In October, almost exactly a year after the demolition, I stood on the deck of the new lake house and looked out at Cedar Lake. The water was calm, reflecting the autumn colors of the mountains. Everything looked almost exactly as it had when I was a kid. Robert Chen had turned out to be an excellent HOA president. The new board had simplified the rules, established transparent finances, and focused on actual community improvements instead of petty enforcement. The guardhouse had been removed. The ridiculous fines had been eliminated. People were actually enjoying living in Cedar Lake Estates again. I'd kept my authority as Lot 1 owner, but I rarely needed to use it. The new board ran things competently and checked with me on major decisions as required by the covenant. It was how my grandfather had always intended it to work. Tom Mitchell drove up from Atlanta for the official housewarming party I threw in November. We stood on the deck with beers, watching the sunset. Your grandfather would be proud, Tom said. You saved this place. I just enforced the rules he set up, I said. He's the one who had the foresight to protect the subdivision from people like Patricia. Speaking of which, I got a call from a reporter doing a follow-up story, Tom said. They wanted to know if you had any regrets about how things played out. I thought about that. The legal battle, the stress, the year of my life consumed by fixing someone else's corruption. Then I thought about my grandfather's lake house standing solid behind me, about the community that had come together to rebuild the HOA properly, about Patricia Thornton sitting in prison where she couldn't hurt anyone else. No regrets, I said. This is how it was supposed to be. Tom raised his beer. To property rights and HOA accountability. I clinked my bottle against his. And to my grandfather, who was smart enough to see this coming 40 years ago. The sun set over Cedar Lake, painting the water gold and orange. Somewhere in the subdivision, someone was grilling dinner and music was playing. It felt like home again, the way it was supposed to feel. I'd come to Cedar Lake for a quiet weekend and found a war instead. But we'd won that war, and the subdivision was better for it. The HOA served the community now, instead of the other way around. People could enjoy their properties without fear of arbitrary fines or power-hungry board members, and my grandfather's lake house stood on the shore where it belonged, ready for another generation of summers and memories. As I stood there on the deck, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Margaret Walsh, the HOA treasurer. The message was short. Monthly financials posted to the website. We're actually under budget this year. Your grandfather built something good here. I smiled and put the phone away. Yes, he had. And now it was my job to make sure it stayed that way. The next morning, I woke up in the Lakehouse to the sound of water lapping against the dock. I made coffee in the kitchen that smelled like fresh paint and new wood, and carried it out to the deck. The lake was misty in the early light, peaceful and perfect. A boat went by, someone heading out for morning fishing. The driver waved and I waved back. I didn't know his name yet, but I'd learn it. I'd learn all the neighbors' names eventually, the way my grandfather had known everyone in the subdivision. This was what he'd wanted when he bought 247 acres of Georgia forest back in 1962. A place where people could build homes and build community, where the rules existed to help instead of hurt, where no one person could hijack the whole thing for their own ego or profit. Patricia Thornton had tried to destroy that vision. She'd failed spectacularly, and the cost of that failure was her freedom and her reputation. But the vision survived, stronger than before, because now everyone understood how precious it was. I finished my coffee and went inside to make breakfast. The house still didn't feel quite like home yet, but it would. These things took time. The important part was that it existed again, that my grandfather's legacy was restored, that Cedar Lake Estates was back to being the kind of place he'd imagined. Later that day, I drove down to the clubhouse for a board meeting. Robert Chen had asked me to attend to discuss some proposed updates to the common area landscaping. It was exactly the kind of reasonable, practical HOA business that should have been happening all along. The meeting was quick and professional. The board presented their proposal, explained the costs, and asked for my input as Lot 1 owner. I approved it with minor suggestions about native plants that would require less maintenance. Everyone nodded, took notes, and moved on to the next agenda item. This was how it was supposed to work. No drama, no power plays, just neighbors working together to maintain a nice place to live. After the meeting, James Porter pulled me aside. Keith, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I've lived here for 12 years and the last 2 under Patricia were miserable. She fined me 3 times for planting azaleas that were supposedly the wrong shade of pink. The whole thing was ridiculous. You shouldn't have had to deal with that, I said. Nobody should. Well, it's different now, James said. People are actually happy to be part of the HOA again. That's because of you. I shook my head. It's because of my grandfather. He set it up right from the beginning. I just enforced what he built. Either way, we're grateful, James said. I drove back to the Lakehouse feeling good about the direction things were heading. The subdivision had weathered a serious crisis and come out stronger. The legal system had worked eventually. The criminals had been punished. The community had been restored. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something new. Someone had placed a small bronze plaque near the front steps. I got out of the truck and walked over to read it. Harold Jameson, 1932-2021, founder of Cedar Lake Estates. He built this place with vision and care. We honor his memory by protecting what he created. I stood there for a long moment, feeling emotion tighten my throat. I didn't know who'd placed the plaque, but it didn't matter. The sentiment was what counted. My phone rang. It was Tom Mitchell. Hey Keith, I've got news. Patricia's attorney just filed an appeal of her conviction. Figured you'd want to know. I sighed. Of course she was appealing. People like Patricia never admitted they were wrong. What are the chances it goes anywhere? Minimal, Tom said. The evidence was overwhelming and the jury verdict was sound. Her attorney is probably just going through the motions, but it'll take a few months to resolve. Keep me posted, I said. And Tom, thanks for everything. I know this wasn't a typical case for you. Are you kidding? This was the most fun I've had in years, Tom said. We got to destroy an abusive HOA and send a criminal to prison. That's a good day at the office. After we hung up, I went inside and started a fire in the fireplace. The evening was getting cold and the warmth felt good. I settled into the leather chair that had been my grandfather's favorite and looked around the room. Everything was new, but it felt right. The same layout, the same view of the lake, the same sense of peace that had always defined this place. Patricia Thornton had tried to take that away and she'd failed. The fire crackled and the sun set outside the windows. I had nowhere to be, nothing urgent demanding my attention. Just a quiet evening in the mountains, in a house that had been demolished and rebuilt, in a community that had been corrupted and restored. My grandfather had bought this land more than 60 years ago with a vision of what it could become. He'd built carefully, planned thoughtfully, and protected his creation with legal structures that stood the test of time. When someone tried to pervert that vision, those structures had held. The Lot 1 clause had seemed like an old-fashioned quirk, but it turned out to be essential protection against exactly the kind of abuse Patricia had attempted. I made a mental note to update my own will, to make sure whoever inherited this property after me would understand the responsibility that came with it. The Lot 1 authority wasn't about control, it was about stewardship. It was about making sure Cedar Lake Estates stayed true to its founding principles. The next few months were quiet. Patricia's appeal was denied. She settled into her prison sentence. The HOA continued operating smoothly under Robert Chen's leadership. Property values in the subdivision actually increased as word spread that the corruption had been cleaned out. I spent most weekends at the Lakehouse using it the way my grandfather had intended. I fished, I read books on the deck, I got to know the neighbors properly. It wasn't the same as having the original house with all its history and memories, but it was good. It was home. One Saturday in March, almost 18 months after the demolition, I was working on the dock when a car pulled up that I didn't recognize. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Mr. Jameson, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Emily Thornton. Patricia is my mother." I straightened up, immediately wary. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Emily said quickly. "For what my mother did to your house, to you, to everyone here. I've been so ashamed." I didn't know what she was doing until it all came out at the trial. I studied her for a moment. She looked genuinely distressed, nothing like her mother's aggressive arrogance. "You're not responsible for your mother's actions, I know. But I felt like someone in the family should say we're sorry," Emily said. "What she did was horrible." Watching the trial, hearing all the evidence, I barely recognized her. The mom I grew up with wouldn't have done those things. "Power changes people," I said. "Sometimes it brings out the worst in them." Emily nodded. "She writes me letters from prison. She still doesn't think she did anything wrong. She blames you, blames the lawyers, blames everyone except herself." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "Well, I wanted you to know that not everyone in our family is like that," Emily said. "And I'm glad the HOA is being run properly now. My mom hurt a lot of people. I'm glad they're getting a fresh start." After Emily left, I thought about what she'd said. Patricia Thornton was sitting in prison, bitter and unrepentant, while the community she'd tried to control was thriving without her. There was a lesson in that about accountability and consequences, about the importance of checks on power. My grandfather had understood that when he created the Lot 1 clause. He'd seen that even well-intentioned organizations could be corrupted, and he'd built in a safeguard. It was the same principle as constitutional checks and balances, just applied to a small subdivision in the Georgia mountains. That evening, I sat on the deck and drafted an email to all the Cedar Lake homeowners. I'd been thinking about it for a while, and Emily's visit had crystallized my thoughts. The email explained the history of Cedar Lake Estates, my grandfather's vision, and the purpose of the Lot 1 clause. I laid out my commitment to use that authority sparingly and only to prevent abuses like what Patricia had attempted. I also proposed creating a formal oversight committee of homeowners who could challenge any Lot 1 decisions they felt were unreasonable, with disputes to be resolved through binding arbitration. My grandfather gave me authority over this subdivision, but that authority comes with responsibility, I wrote. I want to make sure future Lot 1 owners understand that responsibility, and that the homeowners have recourse if that authority is ever abused. We learned a hard lesson about unchecked power. Let's make sure we never have to learn it again. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Within a week, we'd established the oversight committee and updated the covenant to include the arbitration provision. It added another layer of checks and balances, making Cedar Lake Estates even more resistant to future corruption. Robert Chen called me after the vote. "You didn't have to do that, you know. You could have kept absolute authority. My grandfather didn't create this place to be a dictatorship," I said. "He wanted a community. The Lot 1 clause was supposed to be a safety valve, not a throne." "Well, everyone appreciates it," Robert said. "You're building something good here, Keith, something that'll last." As spring turned to summer, life at Cedar Lake Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board was competent and responsive. The oversight committee provided accountability. The simplified rules meant people could enjoy their properties without constant fear of violations. It was, finally, the kind of place my grandfather had envisioned. I was at the Lakehouse on a Sunday morning in June when I got an unexpected call from Marcus Webb, the assistant district attorney. "Keith, I wanted to give you an update. Patricia Thornton's parole hearing is coming up. She's eligible after serving 18 months with good behavior." My stomach tightened. "Is she going to get out?" "Probably not on the first hearing," Webb said. "The parole board takes financial crimes seriously, especially when there's no restitution yet. But I wanted you to know so you could submit a victim impact statement if you want to." I thought about it for a long time after Webb hung up. Part of me wanted to write a scathing statement about the damage Patricia had caused, about my grandfather's house reduced to rubble, about the community she'd corrupted. But another part of me just felt tired of the whole thing. In the end, I wrote a brief statement focusing on the facts. The illegal demolition, the financial harm, the breach of trust. I didn't dwell on the emotional impact or ask for any specific outcome. I just laid out what had happened and let the parole board make their own decision. Patricia's parole was denied. She'd serve at least another year before the next hearing. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard the news. I just felt sad that it had all been necessary, that someone had been so consumed by power and greed that they'd destroyed themselves and hurt so many others in the process. But Cedar Lake Estates was healing. Property values were up. New families were moving in, attracted by the beautiful location and the newly functional HOA. The subdivision was growing and thriving exactly as my grandfather had hoped it would. I spent the 4th of July weekend at the Lakehouse, hosting a barbecue for the neighbors. About 20 people came, bringing food and drinks and good conversation. We watched fireworks over the lake and talked about plans for improving the common areas, about kids starting school in the fall, about normal neighborhood things. This was what it was supposed to be like. This was what we'd fought for. As the last of the guests left and I was cleaning up, Robert Chen helped me carry dishes inside. "You know, Keith, when this whole thing started, I thought the subdivision was doomed," he said. "Patricia had run it into the ground financially and legally. I figured we'd end up dissolving the HOA and losing all the common areas. But you saved it. You really did." "We all saved it," I said. "You stepped up to lead. Margaret fixed the finances. James made the rules reasonable. I just enforced what my grandfather built." "Give yourself some credit," Robert said. "You could have taken the settlement money and walked away. Most people would have. Instead, you fought to make this place what it should be. That takes character." After he left, I stood on the deck in the darkness listening to the lake and thinking about the journey from that terrible day when I'd found my house demolished to this moment of peace and community restored. The legal battle had been exhausting. The emotional toll had been significant. But we'd won something important, proof that accountability matters, that communities can stand up to corruption, that systems of checks and balances actually work when people are willing to enforce them. My grandfather had built those systems into Cedar Lake Estates from the beginning. He'd seen the potential for abuse and planned accordingly. The Lot 1 clause had seemed archaic and unnecessary until it became the only thing standing between a tyrant and complete control of the subdivision. I thought about all the HOAs across America, thousands of them, most run by well-meaning volunteers but some corrupted by people like Patricia Thornton. How many of them had safeguards like the Lot 1 clause? How many homeowners were suffering under abusive boards with no recourse? The Cedar Lake story had gotten some media attention during the trial. Maybe it would inspire other subdivisions to build in better checks and balances, to demand transparency and accountability from their HOA boards. Or maybe it would just stand as one example of what can happen when someone stands up to corruption and refuses to back down. Either way, my grandfather's lake house was rebuilt. Cedar Lake Estates was thriving. Patricia Thornton was in prison where she belonged. And I had a home in the mountains where I could fish and read and remember the man who'd built all of this with vision and care. That seemed like enough. That seemed like justice. I went inside, locked up the house, and headed to bed. Tomorrow I'd drive back to Atlanta and return to my regular life. But I'd be back next weekend and the weekend after that and for years to come. Because this was home now, truly home, in a way it hadn't been since my grandfather passed away. We'd fought for it, bled for it, defended it in court and in the court of public opinion. We'd rebuilt it brick by brick and rule by rule, and it was worth every moment of the fight. The last thing I saw before falling asleep was moonlight on the lake through the bedroom window. The same view my grandfather had loved for 30 years. Some things, I thought, are worth protecting no matter what it takes. Cedar Lake Estates had learned that lesson the hard way. But we'd learned it well, and we wouldn't forget it. The subdivision my grandfather built was safe now, protected by good people and good systems, and that was the best ending I could have hoped for.